Good morning and welcome to the fifth meeting of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee for 2026. We have apologies from Claire Baker and Alexander Stewart. So our first item of business is to decide whether to take items 5 and 6 in private today. Are we all agreed? Thank you. So our next item of business is our evidence session with the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice on the Scottish Government's 2026-27 budget. And I welcome to the meeting Shirley-Anne Somerville, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Julie Humphreys, Director for Tackling Child Poverty and Social Justice, Stephen Kerr, Director for Social Security, and Adele Corner, Finance Lead, Social Justice, Scottish Government. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I invite the Cabinet Secretary to make some brief opening remarks.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. This budget invests funding of almost £68 billion to secure a fair, healthy, safe, prosperous and green society to tackle the cost of living crisis and deliver on the priorities of the people of Scotland. Thanks directly to the decisions we've taken, 55% of Scottish taxpayers are now expected to pay less income tax than if they lived in England. And unlike in England, they will continue to benefit from free tuition, free prescriptions, no peak rail fares and expanded childcare. We are, of course, having to operate in a highly challenging financial environment, exacerbated by a UK budget which failed to deliver for Scotland, which will not move the dial on the cost of living for squeezed households, and which left us with resource funding expected to grow each year by an average of just 1.1% in real terms across the forecast period, not enough to change the difficult fiscal position that we face. But despite these constraints, we have again put child poverty at the heart of the budget with a package of coordinated investment, including £61.5 million for our Tackling Child Poverty Fund to supercharge action on child poverty across the life of the next Parliament, with details set out in our forthcoming Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan, and more than £100 million over 3 years to support delivery of a universal breakfast club offer for primary school-aged children by August 2027. Meanwhile, the budget provides for an increase to £28.20 per week in 26-27 in our transformational Scottish Child Payment, an increase of over 180% since launch. Additionally, we will increase the value of the Scottish Child Payment to £40 per week for children under the age of 1, commencing in 2027-28 to provide increased support in the critical first year of a child's life. The budget also sets out how the £141 million that would have been spent on our two-child limit payment will be reinvested next year to tackle child poverty, and in keeping with the commitment to do so given by both the First Minister and myself. Overall, for social security assistance, we are investing around £7.2 billion in 2026-27. This fully funded investment will support around 2 million people, and not just children kept out of poverty, but support as well for disabled people and their carers, and essential help for pensioners and others with winter heating payments. As I set out in my letter last month, Convener, since the committee's pre-budget scrutiny was carried out, there have been a number of significant developments. Most importantly, the updated SFC forecasts, which reflect a number of key changes. The most notable being the UK Government's welcome but very belated reversal of the wholly unacceptable cuts it announced to personal independence payment in July last year. As a result, our overall additional investment in Scotland's social security system is expected to fall from £1.8 billion to £1 billion by 29/30, which is a 45% reduction compared to the June 2025 forecasts. Meanwhile, the proportion of the overall resource budget which the Scottish Government has chosen to invest in Scotland's social security system over and above the funding we receive from the UK Government through the block grant adjustment will be around 1.7% each year from 26-27 to 29-30. Compared to the position set out in the medium-term financial strategy in June last year, this is a reduction of 0.8 percentage points in 26-27 and 1.4 percentage points by 29-30. Convener, this updated position set out in the SFC forecast does demonstrate very clearly, in my view, that our social security investment is sustainable and that we in this government bring forward costed financial programmes that deliver real benefits for the people of Scotland. Turning specifically now to the subject of adult disability, I must say that the proposals put forward last week by the Scottish Conservatives to overturn the eligibility criteria which were unanimously approved by Parliament and to remove assistance from people with mental health conditions are, in my view, wholly unacceptable, abhorrent and barbaric. I am deeply concerned as well by the stigmatising rhetoric we've heard about mental health, which completely ignores the fact that adult disability payment supports disabled people with the everyday tasks, which of course many of us take for granted. Importantly, the latest Scottish Fiscal Commission forecasts now show a 70% reduction in the additional investment required for adult disability payment in 29-30. Over and above what is received in block grant adjustments, meaning that £770 million originally forecast by the Scottish Fiscal Commission in June 2025 is now reduced to £287 million. Importantly as well, the causes of increased demand for disability benefits are actually analysed in a detailed report published last Thursday by the Chief Social Policy Officer. The report sets out that the evidence currently available does not indicate that the conscious policy decisions we have taken in Scotland to deliver a better system of disability benefits are the primary driver of increased spending. Instead, the report sets out that the two main contributors are rising ill health and the UK Government's raising of the state pension age, which of course means more people can get adult disability payment for longer and an ageing population. Equally significant, in my view, is the Delivering Dignity report published by the Resolution Foundation in December, which explicitly stated, and I quote, "The introduction of ADP shows that improving the claimant experience is not at odds with keeping caseloads and costs under control. And, contrary to much of the ill-informed commentary of the last week, I quote again, there is no evidence that ADP is a more leniently awarded benefit than PIP." In conclusion, Convener, a value-for-money Scottish social security safety net, which all of us may need at some point in our lives, this is something which, in my view, this Parliament should be enormously proud of. I know I certainly am. I thank you, Convener, again for the opportunity to take questions from committee this morning.
Okay, thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I'm now going to move straight into questions and I invite Marie McNair. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary and your officials. Audit Scotland recommends that the Scottish Government should have a clear strategy to manage risks to the Scottish budget arising from UK Government decisions on benefit spending. I'm not clear, given the last-minute U-turns they've made, how you strategise for that, and evidence Audit Scotland didn't seem to be clear on that either. Can I have your thoughts on that, please?
So there is no denying that the Scottish Government's budget choices are impacted by our exposure to UK Government decisions. In my area, that's particularly relevant with benefit expenditure. There is continued uncertainty around some areas, many areas of UK benefit expenditure. We have, for example, the TIMS review ongoing at the moment, a review of universal credit, which, although fully reserved, does impact on people here in Scotland. So there is a real challenge, both in terms of the impact on the budget and indeed just the impact on our people as well. The way that we have to look at that within the government is to attempt to work with the UK Government to ensure that we are asking them to give us as much notice as they possibly can of changes to allow us to make planning assumptions as best that we can. That is challenging, and we've seen examples that I'm sure I don't need to rehearse to committee about where that hasn't happened. And within our own gift, we then have to look at the Fiscal Sustainability Delivery Plan and the medium-term financial strategy to ensure that we are challenging ourselves about the funding and to ensure that we are looking at the Scottish Government budget in the round to ensure that we are always content that we have a balanced budget And that's exactly what we're providing in front of committee again today. Within year, clearly, we have robust in-year financial mechanisms and management practices as well. It does provide the challenge, however, of course, when we have a system where the vast majority of benefits are still reserved to Westminster. And it would be fair to say that our this government's certainly view of social security being a human right is not one that appears to be shared by either the previous government or indeed this current government.
Thank you. Very challenging, but still managing to set a balanced budget every year. Obviously, the U-turn on PIP gave us at the Timms review. What influence are we having on that? And is it alive really to the impact it could have on devolved benefits?
Well, I would welcome I do welcome the ongoing discussions that I have with Stephen Timms. Indeed, I spoke to him just yesterday on the work that is being undertaken by the Timms Review at this point. I think it would be fair to say that he, as a minister, has endeavoured to keep the Parliament as up to date as possible. The challenge will be when we're getting to the point of the review is reaching its completion and decisions are starting to be made. And then when the decisions are made, what prioritisation and what importance is given to the impact on Scotland. So I certainly welcome the fact that Stephen Timms is accessible to myself to have discussions with. I would put his personal work to one side, though, and say that I am concerned overall that we haven't had good working relationships with the UK government in terms of other benefits and other changes that have had significant impacts on Scottish Government budgets.
Thank you. That's me just now.
Okay, thanks very much. I'm now going to move on to Carol Mockin. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I just wanted to ask a wee bit about the Scottish budget increases in the Social Security Scotland's fiscal resource budget by around 40 million. So, and in a recent parliamentary question, it said that 180 staff are moving from the Scottish Government to the agency, and I think we've discussed that in committee before. So I just wondered what else is included in the 40 million resource budget increase, if you've got detail of that.
Yeah, I'll bring in Stephen in a minute, because this directly impacts on what has been happening in his directorate and that is moving to agency. But this is a process that committee would expect to happen. We are reaching the point where the programme is coming to an end. The evolution of social security will continue, but the actual devolution of it within the programme is coming to an end. So we would expect the ways of working within government to change, some of which that have previously been within government now need to move to agency. But if I can bring Stephen in to give some of the examples of that.
Yeah, so you're right in saying that the £40 million is greater than just people. If you think of it as assets, we've got a number of we've got a number of contracts that we have in place. So, for example, our testing contract at the moment, that's around £10 million, and that allows us, when we're doing the changes, introducing new benefits or doing systems upgrades, we've got to test all of that. So there's a number of contracts that we have in place. We'll also be launching the final suite of benefits in March, and there is support arrangements in place for what we call hypercare, which is after those benefits go live, to make sure, again, that they're bedding in, that they're operating correctly. We've got other systems that talk to the main operating system, so the way in which agents raise tickets in Social Security Scotland's done another software platform. There are licence costs for that platform as well. So all of that, the cost of those assets has been held within my programme. With the programme coming to an end, that moves over to the agency.
Okay. No, thanks. That's helpful. One of the other questions, and I'm not sure you just touched on it, about the sort of live running and digital development functions. So one of the questions I've got here is the policy and delivery function within the Scottish Government has a budget of 32 million in 26-27. And so can you just explain that? Would that be your department as well?
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, that's essentially the budget that I'm left with
at
the end of the programme. So around half of that goes on core elements of, if you like, the social security system that we'll maintain responsibility for in the government. So funding for the courts and tribunals service. We've got the independent advocacy service. We've also got new burdens, obligations to local government. So there's those arrangements don't transfer to the agency, they stay with me, and I have to fund those. Plus, obviously, we retain the policy-making function in the government as well. So when you put all of those things together, plus a number of other recharges within the government, that's the budget that I'm left with, and it's around £32 million.
No, that's helpful. Thank you. Thanks, Cabinet Secretary. And I've just got one last question at this point. So the spending review sets out a cumulative savings and efficiencies for Social Security Scotland of 27 million, sort of across the spending review period. And we just wondered if that is proportionate, if you're quite content with that in terms of the large scale of the Social Security budget.
So the public service reform and the savings that are set out in the spending review are very important. The savings set across the spending review period apply to the whole Scottish social justice portfolio, not just to Social Security Scotland, but given the size of Social Security Scotland, we would anticipate them playing a major role in this. I think it's very important that we continue to look, as I say, about how social security will evolve. We're looking at a number of areas that will allow a better service for clients and a more efficient way of running government. So, for example, it's probably easiest if I give examples that what we've done in the past to around automation of payments. So you don't have to apply for Best Start grants, Best Start food separately. You do that as part of your Scottish Child payment. The ability for us to look at social security in the round, now that the benefits have been devolved, and to be able to make sure that we're continuing to challenge ourselves to continuously improve the system, both for the benefits of the clients and actually running a more efficient and effective system, is where the savings fit into that. Now, ministers, I'm sure, I certainly will be continuing to challenge to see how much further we can go than simply what is in here, because, as I say, there is a dual benefit to making changes like this. So I think that is a reasonable and proportionate savings challenge that we've been set, and it's important that we do that because through that we will deliver a better service for clients at the same time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you. I'm now going to invite Jeremy Balfour in. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thank you. Good morning, Cabinet Secretary, and good morning to your team. At our session on 22nd January, David Wallace told the committee that Social Security Scotland can drive public service reform and efficiencies. He referred to example for their own payment platform and to data sharing. How are you going to evaluate whether this actually happens, and also how we evaluate if it contributes across the whole of the public sector?
So I gave some examples about how it's happened in the past. Some of these examples will be very obvious and demonstrable because it's a change in, for example, the automation of a payment rather than separate applications. Some of it, much of it, will be around changing processes within Social Security Scotland to ensure that cases are dealt with automatically rather than requiring manual input at some point. So it's important that we look at all the changes that are being made. Some of the ways that we can have a complete oversight of that is obviously because we are, both as ministers and officials within government, but particularly within the agency, now that the programme is coming to an end, very alive to what is being put into the changes and the releases that are put into the social security system that will drive those changes. So what the government invests in terms of the major releases that impact on the running of the live social security system are in effect the ways that we will be able to see some of those changes coming through. The aspect around how we can use data sharing, I think, is really important. One example that we have which I think has demonstrated the potential, is how Scottish child payment information can be used for free school meals. And that's an example, again, of how national government information, through what's in Social Security Scotland, can assist a local authority in being able to ensure that those that are eligible for free school meals can get those free school meals. So that is one example of how we can tie in the work that we're doing on child poverty with our data sharing work to ensure a more efficient and effective system, while helping those that are eligible for benefits to be able to get what they're entitled to.
Just a couple of quick follow-ups from that. I mean, you talked about free school meals, but obviously there's other benefits that can come, for example, school uniforms, that kind of thing. Can that be shared with local authorities as well? I mean, we've had this conversation probably numerous occasions about data sharing, how, you know, we are a fairly small country, and if it can put people off if they've got to keep reapplying for different benefits and grants. And I wonder, how far can we take this? And the second one is, I mean, that sounded a very good, if I can say so, political answer, but I'm still not quite sure how we measure this. What kind of system is there to say in 3 years' time this is working better than it was working, now?
So in terms of the first one, I think we are at the foothills of how we can and should be using data sharing in the future. It's certainly an area where there's a lot of work going on, not just in the child poverty space, but there's an important aspects around work for disabled people, work for carers, that I have been working with my officials and the agency on to see again how we can make the lives easier for people and how we can take barriers away. So I think there's a way that we can work with clients within social security to take away the barriers. Many of those won't just be within Social Security Scotland, that will require local authorities to work with us, and they are very eager to do so in the main. I would have to say they see the real benefit from this themselves. I'm sorry if that sounded a cynical politician's answer, Mr Balfour. I usually try not to, particularly with yourself, but let me try again. I think it's very important about how we look at the impact on people, so we can look at whether we've made it easier about taking away a barrier. Does someone need to apply for another benefit, yes or no, or have we taken that away? But it also ties into how we evaluate. For example, we'll take this as an example, our work on child poverty. So how do we build in the evaluation on child poverty? And perhaps Julie can assist me with this as well.
Great, thank you very much indeed. I think it's really important that across the child poverty programme, that we do look at the evaluation and the impact of different policies. And as I've previously spoken to the committee about, we make sure that for each element we have that data and information, and then we use that to cumulatively assess what the impact is overall across the piece. And as the part of the public sector reform programme, we have an evaluation strategy built into that as well. And with the forthcoming delivery plan that we'll publish before the end of the parliamentary session for the third Tackling Child Poverty delivery plan, we will publish a renewed evaluation and measurement framework alongside that to be transparent about how we're going to evaluate the impact and what we determine what that we think good might look like in terms of the interventions and the impact that we see across the piece.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Second area I just want to cover quickly, if that's okay, Cabinet Secretary, is I just wonder when you're intending to bring forward regulations that would enable Social Security Scotland to estimate levels of fraud and error in devolved benefits.
this was clearly an area which the committee discussed in great detail when we were looking at the Social Security Amendment Act last year. And one of the areas where certainly from memory, committee was very keen that we looked at was the consultation before the regulations, because there was a degree of concern in committee about how the audit function would work. So I committed to the statutory consultation before those provisions in the Act will be implemented. That consultation is well advanced. I'm keen the consultation begins before the Scottish Parliament elections to allow stakeholders to be able to have their say. So we're not losing time in the Purdah period and in the election period, and that the findings of the consultation will obviously determine the timetable for the secondary legislation, and that will obviously again be for the next administration to be able to opine on. But for my part, I'm aiming, and we are on track to have that statutory consultation launched before Purdah begins, to allow that work to continue.
Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Marie McNair back in. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. As we know, the Westminster Parliament debated the bill to remove the two-child limit from universal credit, and it took a while to get to this stage, but we got there nonetheless, and it is welcome. However, because they didn't remove the benefit cap, many families with more than 2 children are still going to be denied that support. And I'm pleased that our policy in Scotland is, to mitigate the benefit cap. How is that reflected in the budget? As I understand, it's going to cost more in DHPs, as more families will be capped.
We will see an impact on the Scottish Government budget, because we will continue to mitigate as far as we possibly can the benefit cap in full. It is disappointing that, well, it's welcome that the UK Government finally said they would scrap the two-child limit. I think that's an important it's an important policy that needed to be done. But when you keep the benefit cap, it by necessity means that there will be children out there that will not benefit from the lifting of the two-child limit. So that is not a situation that we want to be in Scotland. So we will have to increase the amount that we are mitigating on the benefit cap to ensure that everyone benefits from the lifting of the two-child limit.
Thank you. And it's really important for the DHPs to get to families who are impacted, and obviously it used to be enforced through housing benefit. Councils were clear who needed it, but now the cap is applied to UC awards. There needs to be that effective data. Obviously mentioned already, how important sharing that data is. Do you have a sense of how that's working, and in any way how things can be improved?
So it is a challenge, and this is, again, one of the reasons why, rather than the Scottish Government mitigating against the benefit cap, the most effective and efficient way for everybody would be for the benefit cap to be scrapped at source. And that would not leave us in the situation that we're in at the moment. We are putting more money into the mitigation of the benefit cap, as I said, is about £8 million. But then the challenge is to ensure that everybody that can benefit from that mitigation is doing so. We need to work very closely with local authorities as we go through that process. Clearly, this is something which is done through local authorities, and we'll continue to work very closely with them on that.
Thank you. We received the evidence suggesting how the money no longer needed for the two-child mitigation should be spent. Can you give me your thoughts on that? Obviously, folks like John Dickey were obviously talking about us increasing the Scottish child payment, but as I say, it's back to yourself for that.
As to be expected within the Scottish Government budget, there are a myriad of different opinions about how the money could be spent. I do appreciate and understand the views of those who feel that we should have spent all of that money on increasing the Scottish Child Payment still further. We are, of course, increasing the Scottish Child Payment to £40 for those under one, so we will have a Scottish Child Payment premium coming in. But we also have to, as a government, look at what else we can do, not just in social security, but in other areas to tackle poverty and to assist families. So that's exactly why the money is going in to, for example, whole family support in the Tackling Child Poverty Fund, to ensure that we are looking at some of the other drivers of poverty, as well as income from social security. So what you see within here is different policy proposals, the details of which will be further given in the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan that will launch in March. But I think the whole family support is an exceptionally important way of being able to assist families, to be able to provide support, not just on income and income maximisation, but being able to ensure that we assist the family in whatever way they need at the time that they need it and in a place that they need it. And that's coming across very strongly from a lot of work that we're already doing in the Fairer Futures partnerships, and you're really seeing a real difference in the changes that we can make. And that's also an important way to tackle poverty, as well as the work we're already doing on social security.
Yeah, and that's most welcome. I'll hand you back just now. Cheers.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm now going to invite Bob Dodison.
Thanks, Convener. Morning, Cabinet Secretary. I want to kind of reflect some of the evidence I've heard of our own budget scrutiny. We get various anti-poverty groups, child poverty action groups, a whole variety of them, and they understand them to come to this Parliament, and they say really positive things about the investment the Scottish Government is making on child poverty, and they commend real direct action as making a difference. But they also talk about the statutory child poverty targets and clarity over what a credible pathway looks like to delivering on those child poverty targets. So I wonder if you could reflect on that, Cabinet Secretary, and say a little bit more about how the work can show really strong success, but it might just fall short of those targets. What big ideas are underway to drive us towards those targets?
Campaigners are, again, absolutely correct in continuing to push government to go further on this area. We are very conscious of the 2030 targets, and we are determined to meet those targets. And the work that we're doing as we draft the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan that will be published in March is very much based on that credible path. I would again go back to the point that income from social security is an exceptionally important policy driver within that, but it is not the only driver within that. It is important that we look at whole family support, that we look at employability, that we look at transport, and that we look at the areas where people are telling us the difficulty and the barriers that they are having to, for example, getting into employment and being able to access the services that are there in the public sector to support them. So what we will see is further details that will come out in the Tackling Child Poverty Delivery Plan around, for example, the whole family support and how we'll look at the Tackling Child Poverty Fund to be able to deliver further on that.
And can I just check, Cabinet Secretary, because my original question was going to talk about the Scottish Government spending review and how that spend, not just in social security payments, but in a whole range of other services and supports that are offered, sits in the context of that spending review. Are you confident that that spending will take account of our ambitions to meet our 2030 targets?
Well, what we absolutely do within government when we're looking at tackling child poverty, the budget that I have within social justice is an exceptionally important part of that. I have social security, for example, have the Fairer Futures partnerships. But we also have the important oversight right across government. So appreciate and understand there's been a focus on how we're spending the money that we were going to mitigate the two-child limit on, and the details have been laid out in the budget on that. But there's also money that's elsewhere in the Scottish Government budget, out with my portfolio, that is important as part of that work too, whether it's around the work on breakfast clubs in education, employability within the Deputy First Minister's portfolio and so on. So our ability to work as a Cabinet subcommittee on child poverty and have that oversight chaired by the First Minister is an important way that we challenge ourselves right across government to look at that, not simply just looking at my budget, but looking at how every single budget can impact on child poverty. And that's why I can have reassurance that when we're looking at the spending review, it's not just me that's been looking at this, it's been every Cabinet Secretary who are looking at the impact that they can make on the delivery against the 2030 targets and the work that they can play as we draft that plan that will be published in March.
That's very helpful. So that cross-government work's really important, but also between different governments as well. And I get the frustrations, Cabinet Secretary, that Scottish Government statutory targets can be impacted by decisions taken elsewhere in the UK as well, and that can knock strategies off course. One Parent Family Scotland told us that the Child Maintenance Service UK Responsibility Reserve is a significant issue for a lot of low-income, vulnerable families, and they specifically asked whether the Scottish Government would consider funding advice services, not necessarily the Scottish Government's responsibility, of course, but that idea of partnership working or complementary working in relation to that. And can I put on the record as well that I know that we also have a statutory duty to maximise benefit uptake in Scotland, and that's on devolved benefits, but I also know the Cabinet Secretary is not blinkered to the opportunities to maximising benefits across the board, including reserve ones, even though that's not the Scottish Government's responsibility. So neither is the Child Maintenance Service. However, what added value can the Scottish Government give to assisting lone parent families in getting the money they need and they deserve?
So I think it is disappointing that the UK Government Child Poverty Task Force didn't commit to learning from the project that was taken forward by Fife Gingerbread and One Parent Families Scotland. There was a tremendous amount of work went into this area. It is a reserved area, but had we had better working and shared learning as the UK Government's Child Poverty Task Force concluded, I would have hoped we would have been able to get into a discussion about the learning that could have been undertaken through the work that's happened in that. Child maintenance is reserved. There are some announcements of changes within the UK strategy, but it does fall short of the transformation that stakeholders were looking for. We are engaging still with One Parent Families Scotland and Fife Gingerbread to learn from the action they've taken to date and to understand if there's more that we can do. Clearly, within the Scottish Government's budget, we include access to welfare and debt advice, income maximisation and so on. So there's ways that we can hopefully assist people. But it is an example of how poverty can continue for some families because of a reserved policy decision. Another one that we heard of only yesterday when we had the joint cabinet with disabled people's organisations is around access to work and the failure of the access to work scheme to assist disabled people expeditiously, and that was causing real difficulties in disabled people either staying in employment or taking up an employment opportunity. So there are real examples about where, with the best will in the world, a devolved system can assist people as much as we can, but if there's another part of the system that is run elsewhere and there's not changes that are going to be made to that, then it does make it very difficult to lift that particular family out of poverty if the underlying reason for that is an issue which is reserved.
I'm just wondering, Cabinet Secretary, notwithstanding there could be underlying structural issues in terms of criteria and how the maintenance service and other aspects work, if the Scottish Government, its local authority and third sector partners could be well placed to offer tailored advice and support, even though that's not the responsibility of the Scottish Government and its partners in relation to innovation. If the UK Government was to give a quantum, X million pounds, will let you fill in the blank what X would look like, Cabinet Secretary, and the Scottish Government and its partners took forward a strategy in relation to that advice, is that the kind of innovation, notwithstanding you'd rather just control it all here in Scotland in the first place, Cabinet Secretary, is that the kind of innovation that you'd happily discuss with the UK Government?
Well, I'll discuss any innovation with the UK Government, but I think the examples that we've seen so far is a UK Government that makes decisions about issues without actually having any consultation with the Scottish Government. There have been other areas where we had offered to perhaps be an area where we could run pilots up in Scotland to do with assisting about universal credit and childcare. There's been ways where we've offered up learning that we've had in Scotland. Does actually take two people to have that conversation, and you can only get so far writing letters and submitting evidence as we did to the task force. There doesn't appear to be evidence that the UK Government is willing and able to do that. And if they'd like to prove me wrong on that, I'd be delighted to take a call from any UK Government Minister that wishes to run a pilot or to do such work here in Scotland in a joined and collaborative manner. That would, I think, be a first.
I may agree with those sentiments, Cabinet Secretary, but I am, of course, scrutinising the Scottish Government. I think what I'm hearing is that the Scottish Government remains open to being constructive in this area, despite the fact that, as you've said, it takes two to tango, Cabinet Secretary, and we're not really getting there thus far. Can I stay positive, however? And my final question, Child Poverty Action Group suggested there's scope for serious joint working on a whole range of areas between the Scottish and UK Government, and they gave the example of housing and childcare. So I won't ask anything specific other than, do you want to reflect on that suggestion? Is there anything you'd like to put on the record?
Well, there's clear areas where we could have been joint work, and that was demonstrated as we went along the process where we had a UK Government task force on child poverty. There was a number of areas where we could have worked together. There's an entire list of areas where we asked for the UK Government to take action and to work with Scottish ministers on. It's just unfortunate that that's not the way that the setup works at this current time, but our door always remains open because it is clear that the systems need to work better together to get people out of poverty. And we are very willing to do that, whether it's with the UK Government, national government, other parts of the public sector, the private sector. There are possibilities out there. And I hope the UK Government would take up those opportunities as they move to the implementation of their child poverty strategy.
I appreciate that tone. Cabinet Secretary, no further questions.
Okay, thanks very much, Bob. I'm going to invite Carol Mockin in for a supplementary. Thank you.
Thanks. And I'm really sorry if I missed this. I just went through my notes and one of the sort of, it's just a clarity. So when we're scrutinising it as a budget, you know, the statutory duty to increase benefits by inflation is already on the government. I think I'm correct in that. So I just wondered, in terms of the allocation, I think there's some allocation from the two-child limit funds that you received. And I just wanted to clarify, is that how you allocated money, or did you already have the money to uprate? It's just for a point of clarity.
So, as we've laid out within the budget, when we've looked at how the two-child limit mitigation money will be spent, within that does include both the money for the new Scottish Child Payment Premium for the under ones, and it does include additional spend on devolved benefits, such as the benefit cap that Marie McNair talked about, and it does also include the underlying increase to Scottish child payment spending on inflation and caseload as well. Yes, it does.
Okay, thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. We'd like to invite Elena Whitman now. Thanks.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning, Cabinet Secretary. I want to spend a little bit of time exploring ADP, the independent review into ADP, and the review that is undergoing in terms of ADP case reviews. And in response to the committee's pre-budget report, the Scottish Government said that it's exploring how reporting on ADP spend can better reflect its role in supporting disabled people. I wonder, Cabinet Secretary, if you can expand on what that work is actually involving.
So it is important that we look at the ADP expenditure, the drivers of ADP expenditure, and have analysis of that undertaken. I mentioned, I think during my opening remarks, that there was work recently published which did look at the drivers of ADP expenditure. Much of this is reflected across the UK, not just in Scotland. I don't think that's surprising when we look at the fact that one of the main drivers that was identified was the increase in the state pension age, for example. So the types of work that we're doing around ADP is both within the agency to ensure that we're keeping an eye on caseload numbers, the numbers of awards as a percentage of applications and so on, but also the work that's undertaken by Professor Linda Bald and others to analyse the drivers of that ADP expenditure, and that will assist us with the forecasting of caseload as we go forward. And I hope, again, a greater understanding about why there is an increase in ADP, so that we can have perhaps a more civilised conversation than we've seen in recent weeks about some of the levels of benefits that we have in Scotland.
I do agree with you. I think that, you know, to find out one of the drivers is that increase in state pension age was a bit of a surprise. It was one of the things that I hadn't even really considered myself, so it was interesting to see that in that report. I'm wondering as well, what is the Scottish Government's estimate of the cost of implementing the recommendations as set out in the independent review of ADP? And to what extent would cost be a deciding factor in the Scottish Government's response to that review?
So we will be able to estimate to some extent some of the costs of the recommendations within the ADP review. My officials are currently looking at that because they are based, they inevitably are based on a lot of assumptions. What I am keen to do is to try and be as open as we can about some of those costs so that people have a better understanding about the scale of some of these, so that when we're having a discussion, we do have to have that discussion also based on the cost of that. I am currently asking officials to see if there's more that we can do so that when we respond to the Adele Harris review, can we put some of that out on the public domain? I think there's only a use to that if I can assure myself that we can put those figures out, be clear about the assumptions that we've made about it, and be clear about the fact that they are forecasts and assumptions and so on, because again, we want to be clear and have a sensible conversation about this. So I do need to look very carefully at the estimates that are coming forward to see if they're robust enough. But I think it is important, if at all possible, that we can move through with that. Clearly, some of the most expensive, and when we are looking at the cost, some of the most expensive aspects of the Adele Harris review come in the section that talks about changes to eligibility. That's one of the key drivers. When we're looking at changes of eligibility, I think it's it's sensible to try and have those discussions with an eye on cost. Now, cost would not be the only factor at all in this, but we are, quite rightly as a government, always challenged on whether our social security spend is sustainable and whether we have a commitment to what we have in place at the moment. And we wouldn't want to make further commitments to anyone unless we were able to carry that through in a sustainable fashion. So those are the types of issues that I am wrestling with as we draw to a conclusion the government's response to the Adele Harris, to see how much detail we can give as we respond to that report.
And that's helpful. I mean, one of the key themes and evidence that the committee received was that ADP doesn't always reflect particular conditions, maybe some more unusual conditions or indeed fluctuating conditions. And you've just made mention there to obviously the eligibility criteria if we think about the over 50% rule. And the University of West of Scotland shared experiences of people with premenstrual dysphoric disorder, which is one of those conditions that's more unusual. And there was evidence that said that there was limited awareness amongst case managers. So I'm wondering whether within the budget there's some money there for training and guidance for case managers to deal with those more unusual cases, and indeed whether that over 50% rule has been looked at in terms of Adele Harris's recommendations in the review.
So the issue around fluctuating conditions overall, I appreciate is one where people want reassurance that our system is able to deal with that. I think we did make changes and alterations to the way that our social security system is person-centred to allow fluctuating conditions to be better served through the application process and through the work that is undertaken within Social Security Scotland when decisions are made. But again, I appreciate that it's an area where there is some concern, and we're quite right to continually challenge ourselves about whether the social security system is delivering for everyone as we intended it to do. I know that there is concern particularly also around conditions or disabilities that are rare, that a case worker may not come across very often. And that's why it is very important to continually look at the training and knowledge of caseworkers and have the support of others within the agency that can be brought in for them to be able to assist in decisions around difficult cases. But I'll perhaps bring Stephen in on this one in particular.
So colleagues in Social Security Scotland have also spoken to the researchers, and there are some links being made, which is good. We've done some awareness sessions for client advisors, and we've got more planned, and we're really keen to link in more closely with the stakeholder community to pick up areas like this. I think the other thing I'd say for the purposes of the record is there's a lot of activity that happens in the agency around things like keeping abreast of fluctuating conditions, making sure that the right discussions are happening internally between the health professionals we employ, the agency's chief medical officer, and frontline client advisors as well. So it's it's an ongoing conversation that happens regularly within the organisation, and it allows us to focus in areas like this that come up to the surface more than others.
That's really helpful. I think that's very reassuring. And finally, for myself, the Fiscal Sustainability Delivery Plan has set out measures intended to have a positive impact on public finances. And this included considering whether ADP reviews are operating as intended. Cabinet Secretary, do you expect this review of ADP reviews to identify any potential savings, and how is that going to be balanced with ensuring that the principles as set out within the legislation for social security are still going to be applied and adhered to?
Well, the very important point is that last point, that the review of reviews, if you like, was to test against the principles that were in the Social Security Act, which, I can remind committee again, everyone in Parliament signed up to those principles. So it is very important that the principles within that 2018 Act are adhered to. That does, of course, include the system being efficient and delivering value for money. That's also an important principle. What the work that has been undertaken wraps up the Adele Harris recommendations and also the work that we committed to do as part of that fiscal sustainability to ensure that we're looking at reviews in the round to test them against the principles that we set out in the 2018 Act that everyone voted for, and to ensure that within that it is delivering value for money and efficiency. The response that I am in the final stages of signing off to the Adele Harris review will wrap up the thoughts on the review of reviews as well, because there's a number of pieces of work that were all running concurrently, and there was no I thought it made little sense to respond to each one of them individually. I would rather respond to all of the points together. So we will wrap that up with the Adele Harris review.
Thank you. Thanks, Convener.
Thanks very much, Elena. I'm now going to invite Jeremy Balfour. Thank you.
Thank you. Just to remind members, in receipt of ADP, I fully agree with the comments that you made in your own statement about the Conservatives, and I've actually written to the leader asking for a response in regard to why he did that, but still waiting that. Just a couple of quick questions, though, around this. I wonder, you said you wrapped up all the reviews and going to respond. My understanding that might have been at the end of January, we're now into February. When are we likely to see that?
So I have made it clear and said to Adele Harris that because I have asked officials to look at the reviews and the Adele Harris will move into around mid-February. So I've made her aware of that slight delay, and it's to ensure that we have a report and a response from government that doesn't just deal with her report but deal with others. So we would anticipate that within the next couple of weeks.
That's very helpful. The second issue, and I suppose this is a kind of broader question and maybe going down a bit of a rabbit hole. I mean, if we go all the way back, you're too young, Cabinet Secretary, but for those of us who are slightly older...
That's very kind, Mr Balfour.
Indeed. But if we go all the way back, the reason that the original ADP was brought in was to help disabled people into employment. And that was the predominant reason for it. I'm just interested, do you still think that's the main reason for ADP? Or do you think it's evolved more now simply to be a benefit for disabled people because they have extra costs in living and not necessarily linked to employment?
Forgive me. So this was a conversation which, again, actually took place yesterday when we had the joint meeting of the Cabinet with disabled people's organisations, where there was a discussion, and I was not involved at the time around why PIP was initially brought in. The points that were being made to myself and the First Minister was that what was said in the House of Commons at the time was around the additional costs of having a disability or a long-term condition. I think it is very important that we continue to remind people that ADP is available to people whether they are in or out of work. And indeed, again, what I was hearing directly from people yesterday was once again how ADP helped them get to work and sustained employment. So I'm certainly very keen that we do not have anything which suggests that if you're in work, you get it. If you're not in work, you don't get it, or vice versa. I think that is unhelpful. I think this is about the recognition of additional costs and the recognition of the fact that that may indeed help people to sustain or get into employment.
Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner.
Okay, thank you very much. Now coming to sort of the end of the questions, and I'm going to touch upon preventative spend and third sector funding as well. And we obviously had a chamber debate as well, and it was touched upon by the Cabinet Secretary for preventative spend as well. So what would you consider are the key linkages between health and the levels of spending on social security, and how is this actually reflected in the Scottish Government policy as well?
So there are very important linkages. I think reducing health inequalities and supporting people to live longer and healthier lives is clearly an ambition for the Government. Health inequalities, there are a number of reasons that those are present within our communities. There's a particular link and a challenge around the number of families in low-income households or indeed those that are finding life particularly challenging financially, where health inequalities are brought to the fore. So poverty is in itself a driver often of ill health. So it's important that we tackle poverty, not just because in of itself it's the right thing to do, but it's also one part of the way that we can assist with tackling health inequalities. The area around the population health framework that was published in 2025 does have a focus on prevention. It's an important part of that work that we have to galvanise action across the whole of the system. So we've got the enabling access to income maximisation for families, achieving consistent delivery pathways, including universal services, and strengthening the NHS contribution for maximising incomes of service users with a focus on families at greatest risk of poverty are some of the ways where these aspects are tied together in a cross-government nature.
Okay, thank you very much. And in terms of how, details, and you've gone into that as well about the pilot for tracking preventative spend and how that will sort of encompass social security spending overall.
So we've announced in the spending review that we'll be piloting an approach to tracking preventative spend across the Scottish budget with a number of partners across the public sector in early 2026. The learning from this will provide the basis for a comprehensive understanding of preventative spend across the whole of the Scottish budget by the summer of 2026, with a view to integrating this approach into the ongoing annual reporting cycle. So that preventative spend pilots are still in development. And I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary for Finance will keep Parliament updated as that work progresses.
Okay, thank you very much. And just going on in relation to third sector funding, and I know it was something, we've done some budget scrutiny on this previously. So what do you think has been learned from the multi-year funding pilot for the third sector, which was, you know, high on the agenda from the evidence that we took from various different witnesses within the sector? And what is the scope for extending this to more organisations? If you could touch upon that, thanks.
So that is something which we're very keen to look at, to see how it can be further expanded or looked at when we're looking at new funding. So, for example, the funding that the First Minister announced for the third sector as part of the whole family support package is a multi-year commitment that's been made for that. So we will look to see what more that we can do to expand multi-year funding. Clearly, the fairer funding approach has a number of different areas. One of it is multi-year funding, very, very important, and the feedback that we had from the pilot that we undertook did show that that did make a difference, as we would expect, to the third sector organisations that were involved in that, and giving them greater certainty. It has been more challenging this financial year to be able to look at either expansion of multi-year funding or other aspects of the fairer funding principles, because the UK government budget was so late, and therefore the Scottish government budget is so late, and then it makes it exceptionally difficult for the government to be able to provide certainty to the third sector. So a lot of the work that myself and officials, not just within my area but across government, have been looking at is around the timely notification of grants. There is around letters of comfort to go out to organisations to ensure that as soon as we possibly can, we are giving them those letters of comfort. And we did so for organisations immediately after the budget was published. Now, that's an ongoing process. It obviously couldn't be done for every organisation on the day of budget publication, but we are endeavouring to do all that we can to assist with the timely notification of grants, which is another important aspect alongside the multi-year funding asks that we have from the third sector.
Okay. And you basically just answered my next question in terms of that, and that was a huge challenge that we heard from third sector organisations, and you know, in terms of the proportion of grants as well, and when they were going to be notified as well. So that's reassuring to hear about the letters of comfort as well. And just finally as well, you know, just to wrap it up. So, how will preventative in third sector funding help stop people actually reaching crisis in the first place?
Well, I think it does play an exceptionally important part of our work to not only tackle child poverty, but to assist people. That's exactly why the First Minister is placing such importance on the whole family support package and the role of the third sector within that. Both he and I indeed other Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers have visited a number of examples of the third sector delivering in our communities, in effect, whole family support. And in essence, if that type of support can be provided to a family before they reach a point of crisis, rather than at that point of crisis, it is far better for the family. It is far better for the effective use of public services, but I would hope that all of us would be able to conclude that the best thing that we can do is to help people as early as possible whenever they need it. And the whole family support is an integral part of that, and the third sector is an integral part of that whole family support.
Okay, thank you very much. And so that ends our questions. Oh, I believe Jeremy wants the last word.
As always, Convener. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to end on a negative note, Cabinet Secretary, but one of the things that was initially cut from the budget this year was the Investing Communities Fund. Now, I appreciate the government have kind of reversed that and it will continue for a year. I'm just wondering, what discussions did you have with the Finance Cabinet Secretary on that? Because you've just talked about giving that support at the earliest point, and certainly the organisations within my region, 2 or 3 of them contacted me who are trying to do that. There was no warning of that. If it hadn't been reversed, they were going to have to close a number of programmes before the summer. So I'm just wondering, you know, in the kind of jigsaw for all putting together, what input did you have on that? And going forward, because it's only a 1-year extension, what suggestions do you give to organisations to then find that money somewhere else?
So if Mr Balfour will forgive me, that fund doesn't sit within my portfolio, it sits within the Deputy First Minister's portfolio, so I don't have the details to hand, but I'm aware Richard Lockhead answered a question in Parliament, I think only last week, about those transitional arrangements, which I hope gave some of the details on that. Clearly, we do recognise absolutely within government that when we are looking at decisions within the budget, it's important that we can try and communicate with organisations as much as possible. The timing of the government budget made that exceptionally challenging for this, and this is one of those examples of being able to have a solution to be able to present to the organisations. But if Mr Balfour will forgive me, I will perhaps further writing either from myself or other Cabinet Secretaries with responsibility for that about the transitional arrangements that are in place for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, well, thanks very much. So we'll have a brief suspension to allow for a change of officials, and thanks again for your contribution today. Okay. Our next item of business is consideration of an affirmative statutory instrument. The Social Security Residence and Presence Requirements Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2026. I welcome the Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice back to the meeting. I also welcome her officials from the Scottish Government. Kyle Murray, Procedural and International Policy Team Leader, and Alex McNeill, Solicitor, Social Security Futures and New Benefits Branch. So thank you for joining us today. So following this evidence session, the committee will be invited in the upcoming agenda item to consider a motion to approve the affirmative instrument. And I remind everyone that Scottish Government officials can speak under this item, but not in the debate if there is one that follows. So I now invite the Cabinet Secretary to make some opening remarks on the SSI. Thank you.
Thank you again, Convener. I welcome the opportunity to assist the committee in its consideration of these draft regulations. This legislation provides a long-term solution to ensure that individuals fleeing crises overseas can access Scottish social security benefits quickly when they arrive. Up until now, we have had to introduce emergency regulations each time a crisis occurs. In recent years, we brought forward emergency changes following the evacuation of Afghanistan in 2021, the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022, the escalation of violence in Sudan in 2023, the escalation of violence in Israel, the occupied Palestinian territories, the Golan Heights in Lebanon in 2023, and most recently in September last year, the escalation of violence between Israel and Iran. The Scottish Commission on Social Security has welcomed our intention to introduce general crises regulations to reduce reliance on emergency legislation. We've aligned our approach with similar changes introduced by the UK Government for benefits it administers, and this assures parity across the UK for people arriving here after a crisis abroad. The regulations remove the habitual residence and past presence requirements for benefits where those tests apply. This will apply to British nationals and to third country nationals who already hold leave to remain in the UK, do not require leave or have been granted humanitarian leave. As immigration law remains reserved to the UK Government, the Scottish Government cannot create new immigration routes or protection schemes. The regulations will apply where the UK Government has provided public information to advise British nationals to leave a country or territory, or has arranged the evacuation of British nationals from that country or territory, or where a person has been granted leave for humanitarian reasons. This will provide a clear exemption for those arriving via schemes such as Ukraine or the recent medical evacuation of children from Gaza. The regulations also extend the temporary absence provisions for people who are stranded abroad due to a crisis, enabling payments to continue for up to 26 weeks. In addition, amendments to the Best Start grant will allow families escaping crises to receive the higher rate pregnancy and baby payment for second or subsequent children, even if their first child was born before they arrived in the UK. This reflects the reality that many families may have been forced to leave belongings and essential items behind. The past presence and habitual residence tests appear across both UK-wide and Scottish social security legislation. Applying them would mean that people arriving unexpectedly as a result of a crisis would be unable to receive support until they had spent sufficient time in the UK or common travel area, something they cannot reasonably prepare for in advance. These regulations therefore disapply those tests for individuals in the specified groups, ensuring that, where they meet all other eligibility criteria, they can access the support they need from day one. Overall, these changes strengthen our ability to respond swiftly and compassionately to international crises, protect vulnerable people and avoid the need for repeated emergency legislation. I am grateful to the Scottish Commission on Social Security for its scrutiny and recommendations which were accepted, and subject to parliamentary approval, these changes will commence on the 18th of March 2026. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, thank you, Cabinet Secretary. I'm now going to ask if anyone's got any questions in relation to the regulations. No? Bob, would you like to come in?
Just very briefly, Cabinet Secretary, I think there's goodwill across the committee to these regulations. I've just seen from my notes that I think you mentioned at Cabinet Secretary, similar regulations have been passed at a UK level a few months earlier. So there appears to be quite clear alignment in relation to what we're doing here and across the UK. Going forward, will there be a joint approach to monitoring the impact of this? Heaven forbid, we don't want these emergency crises to exist, but we know, unfortunately, they do happen. So will there be a joint approach to monitoring the impact of this in the years ahead?
So I think it is very important that we continue the close working with UK government officials on this as we monitor the impact. As we've said many times in committee, the DWP ministers and Scottish Government ministers disagree quite vehemently on quite a lot of policy issues, but we put alongside that actually a very good working relationship on the practicalities of issues like this. And that is one of these areas, both at a ministerial and official level, where we will continue to liaise regularly with counterparts in the UK government to ensure that we do monitor how these work in practice.
Other questions? Would give Cabinet the opportunity to put that on the record, that's all.
Just a quick question as well. So people obviously benefiting from these regulations may be more likely to have language barriers to claiming the benefits. So what will the Scottish Government do to ensure that people who might benefit from these regulations are aware of the support they might be eligible for?
Well, this is an area where Social Security works very closely with relevant stakeholder organisations to ensure that we are providing information in a means and in places that is necessary for the individuals. That's why it is important that we do provide information in different language and in a wide range of formats. It's a key measurement of the Social Security Charter that we have. So there are interpreter and translation services in person, in writing and over the phone to ensure language is not a barrier. And if I may, Convener, I think that's why it's again deeply disappointing that the Scottish Conservatives chose to say that they would make a saving by taking away translation and interpretation services when we are people at points of crisis in their lives and seeking help at most difficult and tragic times. The fact that the Scottish Conservatives would pick that as a way to make savings, I think, points to the barbarity of their proposals last week, once again.
Okay. Thanks for your response to that question. So now going to move on to agenda item 4, which is the formal consideration of motion S6M 20455, that the Social Justice and Social Security Committee recommends that the Social Security Residence and Presence Requirements Miscellaneous Amendment Scotland Regulations 2026 draft be approved. And I invite the Cabinet Secretary to speak and to move the motion. Thanks.
Moved, Convener.
Okay, thank you. And now invite any contributions from members. So we've got no contributions. I'm going to ask if you've got any further contributions.
No, thank you,
Wave your right. Okay, wave your right. Okay then. So thank you. So the question is that motion S6M 20455 in the name of Shirley Ann Somerville be agreed to. Are we all agreed? Yes. Okay, thank you. Are members content to delegate responsibility to me to approve a short factual report to the Parliament on the affirmative instrument? Okay, thank you. So I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary and her officials, and that concludes our public business, and we'll now move into private session.